In a world that's torn with trouble and strife, the quest for peace fills everyone's life. Deep true peace can only come within us first, one by one. Why seek without what lies within? When your mind finds rest, a revolution will begin. What none can give nor take away. Oh,
To the Friday meditation and talk. Usually happens once a month here in the Buddhist Center in Woking. Some of you may be new this time round, I believe. Possibly not having meditated here before. So I will take a few moments to go back to some basics anyway. My name is Prat Nicholas Tarnisaro. I'm actually one of the monks belonging to the Dhammakaya meditation tradition of which this center is a part. Normally though I'm based in Manchester, so I have the chance to come down once a month just to give a little bit of input here and there. My own background is that I've been a monk for about 17 years. Before that I spent 9 years in Thailand, studying, meditating, that sort of thing. And really my own interest in Buddhism grew out of meditation. The talks, though, on the Friday nights are generally aimed at people who have a sort of vague interest perhaps in Buddhism without really going into great detail in it. But mostly it's a time to meditate, to learn the basics of meditation, and perhaps to ask any questions which come up concerning your understanding of the meditation, because it's a good time to do that. So normally the session is in two parts. The first part would be the meditation. We'll sit for meditation for about a half an hour. After that we have a bit of a break, and there'll be a talk today on mysticism. And at the end of that there'll be some time for questions, hopefully some answers as well, which should bring us up to 9 o'clock. For those of you who are new to meditation, although there are many different ways of meditating, but the one, a good and straightforward way to start out, if you are interested in meditation, is working with a technique of visualization. Normally, our human being is made up of two vital parts. You can't be without either of the two. First of them being your body, and the other part being your mind. If you're lucky, then the two go hand in hand. But for many people, the two seem to go in completely different directions. Physically, they may be in one place, and their mind might be in completely another. As you can imagine, with people who are extremely distracted, even people who work a lot with their senses, which is pretty much everyone anyway, because we live in a very visual culture these days. We are often out there with the things that we see, and it does tend to take our whole awareness and consciousness away to those things out there, instead of being back here in balance with our physical well-being in the world. So meditation is a way of bringing the two parts of ourselves back together to a place of balance. And although there are different ways of meditating, most of them are ways of addressing this problem of body and mind becoming somehow separate. So bringing the awareness back within the space of the body again. Unfortunately for the mind, it is rather a mysterious thing in itself. You can't normally see where your mind is. In fact, you can't normally see your mind at all. You might have some sort of sense of where your mind might be, almost like a feeling perhaps of where your attention is located at any particular moment. But actually seeing it or working with it is much more challenging. So generally we take some sort of object or target for the mind and work with that instead. And with visualization we take a visual object, not one which we see with our eyes, but one that we see with our mind's eye. So to give an example of that for those who are new, if you were to think of a picture of the sun shining in the sky, can you think of that? Yeah? So, is it a particular color when you think of it? Yeah? Anyone like to share with us what color their sun is? Gold, for example. But actually it's a picture which you're not seeing with your eyes. You know, you're not looking out of the window and seeing the sun still shining out there. But the fact it has color, even a shape, form, it's actually the work of the mind which is producing that image. And the useful thing about that is that we can use that image to tell us where our mind is. And if we bring that image back within the space of our body, then the mind will tend to follow. So this is the most basic principle of how we can make meditation work. For that to happen easily, though, it is very important that we are relaxed. And being relaxed, again, has its physical and mental components. Being relaxed physically, it's probably more familiar to you. It's to do with relaxing all the muscles in your body. So normally for the first 5 minutes of our meditation, we would spend some time going down through our body, relaxing all the muscles as we go. You may think that I'm already relaxed, what more could you want? But if you actually check each individual muscle, you usually find places where there are still some tension remaining. After that, we start to work with the relaxation of our mental state. This is more to do with the things that we have on our mind, mental clutter of various sorts. Some people think that their mind is relatively empty, but the moment you close your eyes and your mouth, you realize just how much is going on in your mind. Possibly it's been going on the whole time, you just didn't realize it before. And when you come to meditate, then you become extremely aware of just how much turbulence there is really in the mind. And again, this is something which we have to work with, to open up a space in the mind where we can bring our visual image. So how do you clear your mind of these sort of thoughts? In the beginning, we normally start just by willing them away. So simply by not paying attention to all the normal things that we tend to worry about, often we can get rid of a good proportion of the worries in our mind. So usual things like work, friends, family, that sort of thing, we put on one side. We try not to let our mind run off to the future or the past. So if we focus on the present, then that limits our mind still further to keep it close to what's happening with the mind as it's meditating. So relaxing body and mind first of all. After that we do the meditation proper, which entails bringing that picture of something like the sun just now, or bring it inside our body. Often we bring it down to an area somewhere in our abdomen, simply because that's the place where our body is in balance, physically speaking. It's where our central gravity is. If you're a tightrope walker, that's the point you want over the rope at all times. And if we still have some residual thoughts on our mind, we deal with them by a second strategy in our meditation, which is called the use of a mantra. The idea being that if you've already got some sort of word in your mind, then other words don't come in by themselves. So you fill the gap with your own word. And the word, technically speaking, in meditation is called a mantra. And it could be any word you liked. Maybe you already have one, I don't know. But supposing you don't have one yet, you can have one for free, which is Samma Arahang. It's an Indian word. The Samma bit means right or proper. The Arahang part means a high or a pure state of mind. And together they would mean that, a pure state of mind achieved in the proper way. But you may prefer making up your own one, or one in English. Some people like the words brighter and brighter, clearer and clearer, for example. Yeah. So what do you actually do with the bright object? Well, you imagine that you see it continuously, as if it's in your center. If your mind wanders off, you bring it back again to the picture. If the picture disappears, you think of a new one. And little by little, your mind becomes more used to staying centered within yourself, rather than wandering around wherever it takes its fancy. As for the sound of the mantra, you might think that that in itself would be a distraction, but we hear the sound of the mantra coming up from the center of that bright object. So, although in fact we're doing two things, they are both happening in the same place. And perhaps I should add, just for clarity, that we don't say the mantra out loud, because it's embarrassing. But it's as if we hear the sound of the mantra coming up again and again from the center of the bright object. And the two things together will help to work to keep the mind both free of thought and also from wandering as well. So far so good. As for the actual posture of sitting for meditation, you may have seen these sorts of pictures, sitting in a half lotus position. You can study the theory of this, because seeing as we have nice chairs to sit on, it would be a shame to waste them. But if you feel happy or comfortable in such a posture, it may be something you want to try out at home, because it is quite a stable posture for sitting on the floor. You don't tend to fall off the floor. So that's the idea. And once you're sat in that posture, then you are steadfast, and there's nothing that's going to distract you. One thing that you might like to pay some attention to today, though, is how the hands are put together. And it's with the right hand on top of the left hand, index finger of the right hand up against the thumb of the left hand. This is supposed to help you to stop falling asleep, because normally your finger goes first if you ever get sleepy. So it sort of wakes you up in time before you fall off the chair. And your hands just rest in your lap. If the inside of your hands is up against the front of your tummy, then it'll give you quite an upright posture, even without having to try particularly hard. So the idea is not to be like bolt upright, as if you've, as if you're having a photo taken or something, but it's to be relaxed while alert at the same time, able to breathe easily, because you're upright, you have the top part of your body is open, and also able to find that important part in the center of your body. So far so good. So what we do now is have a meditation for about a half an hour, and I'll lead you through that. So that was the dry run already, but what we do now is I'll take you through it and take about a half an hour over the process. We'd like to start by finding a comfortable position for yourself in meditation. Finding a position of poise by which you feel you could sit for a long, long time without having to move around too much. Your hands resting palm upwards on your lap, so that you have a fairly upright posture. And close your eyes very gently, in much the same way you might close your eyes to go to sleep. Start by taking a few deep breaths to yourself, breathing in to the full extent of your lungs, before breathing slowly and smoothly out again. Once again, you can breathe in the cool, refreshing air from around you. And as you breathe out, you may feel that you're letting go of any worries and concerns at the same time. From there, we take a few moments to make sure all the muscles of our body are properly relaxed. Starting at the top of our head and working our way gradually down, relaxing all the muscles as we go. So we start by relaxing our eyebrows and our eyelids. Once again, making sure our eyes are only very gently closed. Closed in much the same way we might close them to go to sleep. As for the muscles of our face, we allow them to become soft. Perhaps smiling slightly to ourselves, but taking care that our jaw is relaxed and that we're not clenching our teeth together. From there, we relax the muscles of our neck. If our shoulders are tense, we allow them to drop to their natural height. Before relaxing our arms, forearms, hands and fingers. So that as our hands rest in our lap, they seem to do so only very lightly. From there we relax all the muscles of our torso, our chest, trunk and abdomen, relaxing both of our legs, all the way down to our feet and our toes. So that eventually, all the way from the top of our head, right the way down to the tips of our toes, there'd be no remaining part of our body with any sort of stress or tension anymore. If we do notice any tension remaining, we do our best to relax it as far as possible, to leave us with the sensation the whole of our body seems to melt away into the atmosphere around us, leaving no sense of discomfort in our body anymore, so that we can turn our attention inwards to the sensation of warmth, well-being and spaciousness on the inside. Something which by any other name we could call our state of mind. And it's also something that needs to be relaxed further to pave the way for the meditation ahead. The usual way that we relax our state of mind is by letting go of all the normal things that we tend to worry about in our lives. Whether it be thoughts of work, friends, family, or studies. We put these things on one side, at least for the time that we're meditating together. If you do have particular things which seem rather important to think about, put them on one side for now, with the thought that you can always come back to them later. Also, we let go of our regrets about the past and our plans about the future. And where that leaves us is in the present moment, with the task in hand, which is a space in our lives that we have created for ourselves only by taking a great deal of trouble. It's not very often that we get to recharge the batteries of our mind. It's only in such a place, together with a meditation group, that we can really focus on making sure our mind is properly relaxed. So we try to make the most of this opportunity, bringing our mind back from 1,000 different things in the outside world to a single place of stillness on the inside. And it's almost as if on the inside there is a sense of peace, somewhere at the center of our being, which was probably there all along, but which up till now we failed to notice. But as we bring our mind back from the outer distractions, we engage with this inner feeling more and more, to a point where the whole sense of peace on the inside seems to pervade the whole of our being, to the point where there's no space left in our mind for any other sort of thought. When we feel relaxed and refreshed, both in body and in mind, very gently, using no effort at all, we imagine that the inside of our body is just an empty space, a hollow cavity without any organs or tissues, muscles or bones, or as if the whole of our body had been transformed somehow into a sort of transparent bubble with nothing on the inside. And inside this empty space of our body, again very gently, without rushing the process at all, we remember back to that picture of the bright shining sun from a few moments ago. Maybe yellow or red in color, orange or white. But this time, instead of appearing in the sky, the bright sun appears within the space of our body, shining with a cool, clear light. A light which is soft, perhaps similar to that of the full moon rather than the sun itself. In the beginning, the actual picture may not be very clear to us, but we accept it anyway, even if it's rather vague. Holding that image in our mind as continuously as we can, for as long as we can, trying to avoid letting the mind spin off onto any other distractions. If, however, we do notice that the mind has become distracted, perhaps by external noise, as soon as we realize, we simply bring it gently back again to the center of the body as before. If the inner object disappears, we can always think of a new one. And apart from that, we just maintain the object as continuously as we can, for as long as we can. The other possible problem that may come up in the meditation is an excess of thought. For many people, the stream of thoughts in the mind is almost continuous. It is hard to find a single break in the thoughts to give ourselves that sense of peace and quiet. In such a case, to open up a space between the thoughts in the mind, we make use of something called a mantra, which is basically a word that we repeat to ourselves silently, as if we hear the sound of it coming up from the center of our bright object. The traditional mantra for this meditation method is the words Samma Arahang, Samma Arahang, Samma Arahang. And we hear the sound of those words coming up as if like a silent music from the center of ourselves, from the center of the bright object, over and over again, gently encouraging the mind to become free of thought, while at the same time linking our awareness more closely with this point in the center of the body. It's also worth mentioning that we need to be as gentle as possible with the mind as we are meditating. any trace of force, any temptation to rush should be put on one side. Something which is not helpful for our meditation progress. What we need to use in the meditation is a sense of lightness, a sense of openness, and allowing things to happen on their own, rather than feeling that we have to create experiences in the mind. So now, for a few more moments in silence, we cultivate our attention at the center of the body, keeping it on target with our bright object at our center, silently repeating to ourselves the sound of the mantra Samma Arahang as well, for as long as there are remaining thoughts in the mind. So now, each to their own practice in silence for a few more moments now, until we come to the appropriate time. Over and over again, lightly, gently, continuously, emanating from the center of your body, keeping your mind on target, remaining with the inner image, which is the focus for your mind. Your attention wanders off to the things around you. You simply bring it back again to that central point each time you realize. If the inner image disappears, you can think of a new one. But if the inner object changes, there's no need to change it back again to what it was before. Simply follow it in its new form, observing from your center, lightly, gently, and continuously. We continue in this way for a few more moments in silence until we come to the appropriate time. Sabbabuddhanupavena, Sabbadhammanupavena, Sabbasanghanupavena, Sattha Soti, Bhavanto Te. So if you'd like to come to the end of your meditation for this evening, you can gradually open your eyes. If you feel at all uncomfortable, then slowly try changing to a more comfortable position before slowly finishing your practice. So did you find you could follow that okay for those of you who were new to the technique? Had something you could follow at least internally. Yes? Even if it's not clear, as long as you have something, then you have a point of reference which you can work on at a later stage. You may have realized that meditation isn't the work of a day, but if you understand the technique and remember it clearly enough, you can take that away with you and practice it on a more regular basis, and little by little it will accumulate more clarity and more sense of centeredness. It'll become more second nature to keep the mind in place. But what is really necessary for that is to practice on a regular basis, let's say 20 minutes a day, and finding time for that somewhere in your daily routine is something which is a big advantage if you are thinking to go further with the meditation. Anyway, I'll leave you to have a bit of a break. You can relax and talk to one another a bit, and after that, when you're ready, we'll take up with the mysticism bit. It's actually personally quite a it's like revisiting a subject to talk about mysticism, because way back in the days when I was very new to meditation, looking at mysticism was one of the subjects which they were interested in the psychology course, which I followed when I was young. And even in those days, it seemed to touch on something significant inside, let's say, to know that although there are many different religions in the world, and there are, on the surface of the religions, they seem so different. But when Westerners come to study about different religions, they have managed to classify and categorize and have familiarity with all the different languages of these religions to the point where they can start to find some similarities under the surface of the differences between the experiences of people from a whole lot of different religious traditions. In England, and it's the same in other countries, whether it be America or Australia, you can find different religions on each other's doorsteps in a way that you just cannot find in the countries where those religions originated from. So it's a very unique position that we are in these days, to be able to compare and to find these similarities where people who have perhaps belonged to those religions for many centuries already, maybe they didn't realize the similarities they shared with other religions and traditions from other parts of the world. But in this task of gathering together mystical experiences, there are two major figures who have had a big influence on our whole perception of really comparative religion, especially from the point of view of the inner experiences which people have. The first is William James, American, the father really of the psychology of religion, who started with his own experiences and always worked in a very subjective way, comparing documents left in different religions. And the fruit of his works was something called The Varieties of Religious Experience, written way back when psychology wasn't even a subject yet. The second figure, quite important too, who built on the work of William James, was someone called Frederick Happold, and this is back in the 60s. He wrote a book which is an anthology called Mysticism. And from reading through the experiences of people who have had what they would consider to be mystical experiences, they started to find some similarities between the experiences. And you might think, well, this is all very well to know about. Does it actually have anything to do with meditation or anything like that? Am I going to become a mystic by the fact that I am doing some sort of meditation? Well, if you know something about the characteristics of these mystical experiences, maybe you can answer some of these questions for yourselves. But I think what you find is that what a lot of these people are describing in their mystical experiences is actually quite similar to some of the sorts of experiences you touch upon in the course of maybe a more successful meditation you might have had. But most of the examples which I'm giving from these two gentlemen are in fact for people who have had these experiences almost without some sort of training. So they have been just walking along the road and wham bam, they have had a mystical experience. If you're into reading the Bible, the sort of road to Damascus sort of experiences. Yeah. So, what are the things which would identify an experience as a mystical experience? According to William James, the first thing is ineffability, which means basically that they're very hard to describe in words. Secondly, there is something called a noetic quality, which these experiences seem to have. They seem to communicate some sort of knowledge which is beyond your normal, everyday, mundane knowledge. Our third thing is that they don't last very long. They are transient. A fourth thing is that there's an element of passivity in them, in that you don't actually have to do anything, they come upon you. So it's not like something which you have willed into being, but it's something which happens to you. The fifth quality is that part of the experience seems to be a unity of things which are normally considered opposites, or things which are normally considered separate from one another. A sense of oneness. Sixthly, there's a sense in which they not only last a short time, but they also seem to do something rather strange with our sense of time. And last but not least, there's a sense of true ego. Use the word ego here because it tends to have rather negative associations, but let's say as if you have come across a true sense of self as a result of your experience, as separate from your normal everyday self. So William James contributed the first 4 of these factors, and Hapo contributed the last 3. So what we'll have a look at now is each of these qualities, giving some examples and also seeing how we can actually measure, in effect, a person's sensitivity to these sorts of qualities in their own experiences, because that's the sort of thing which psychologists do. So the ineffability aspect. Sometimes it's mentioned as being the inability to capture the experience in ordinary language. Some people are very suspicious about mystics in general because they say they've had a wonderful experience, and when they're asked to explain, well, what exactly was it then, they find themselves at a loss for words. So if you are a rather skeptical person, you say, well, if you can't explain it properly, how am I supposed to believe you? The problem is not with putting words into a sentence, but it's finding the words to capture the experience at all. If you are trying to find out more about this, the sort of questions you ask people are, have you experienced something that you cannot put into words? Or, do you feel it being moved by a power beyond description? Or, do you feel aware of more than you could ever describe? These are some of the qualities which such experiences have, which a person may hold in more or less, give more or less significance to them. An example of this is actually from a professor of philosophy who started off with quite humble beginnings in life, but one of the things he had as an experience when he was young was a mystical experience while walking in the fields in Kentucky somewhere. He tried to describe it to others and failed dismally. He said, I tried desperately to make sense of the experience. Like a small boy trying on his father's clothes, nothing seemed to fit. Many ideas and concepts that I expected to fit seemed totally inappropriate. So he couldn't find the words to explain the experience which he'd had. This is Douglas Schrader. Sometimes we evaluate our own meditation experiences, and being able to do this actually helps you quite a lot to give you a vocabulary to describe the experiences which you have had. In our tradition, we have it easier than in some traditions because at least we're working with visual objects. You can imagine that if you're just working with feelings, how do you say how the feeling yesterday was different from the feeling today? At least if it's a picture which you have in your meditation, you have a little bit more of a chance to put something down on paper. Some people are at a complete loss, they just draw it. Maybe the William Turners of this world. Second quality is noetic knowledge. And it's the notion that mystical experiences reveal an otherwise hidden or inaccessible knowledge. And again, this sort of aspect of the knowledge is something which is familiar to us from study of meditation as well. If you were to try to find out about whether people have had this aspect of the experience, the sort of questions you would ask them is, have you sensed God or a greater being in the beauty of nature? The Walt Whitmans of the world. Knowing you were surrounded by a presence of some sort, or hearing God or an inner voice speak to you. So knowledge which is normally inaccessible, becoming accessible to you by virtue of that sort of experience. An example of this, which comes from William James himself, is saying that they are states of insight into depths of truth unplumbed by the discursive intellect. They are illuminations full of significance and importance, all inarticulate though they may remain, and as a rule they carry with them a curious sense of authority for after time. So it may be a weird experience for you, but the strange thing is that you are entirely convinced by them. And although you may have had such an experience in a year long ago, those experiences remain fresh in your memory, even though you might have completely forgotten everything else that happened that year. It's very strange. They have a sense of authority and clarity which doesn't seem to wear off with time. In meditation also we tend to accept that there are different levels of knowledge, some of which can be accessed by normal rational thinking, some which you simply can't get at by conceptual thought. And hence we talk about 3 levels of knowledge: sense knowledge, hands-on knowledge, and this third noetic knowledge, which here we'd refer to as insight of various sorts. Sense knowledge is probably more familiar to you by the sort of things which you perceive with your external senses, things you see, hear, taste, smell, or touch. For example, you may learn in a textbook that fire is hot, and you might be even impressed by that detail. But it's simply academic knowledge. You could remember it, maybe you could get us a few points on an exam by remembering that knowledge. And you can pass on such knowledge to other people, but it may not be particularly convincing, because it's just parrot learning in a sense. Second sort of knowledge, which is a little bit better, still reliant on the senses, but it is better in terms of the fact that it is hands-on knowledge. Maybe the experience of putting your hand in the fire, something you remember much more clearly than having learned about it in some textbook somewhere. No one needs to convince you of how hot is hot now. And the interesting thing about these sorts of knowledge are that they are transferable to other situations. Hence, if you are ever a new graduate from school, they always ask for experience, because it means that you can actually put into practice what you've learned in theory. Even so, in school they can't expect to teach you anything more than these 2 levels of knowledge. In the old days they only taught the first level. These days they're getting a little bit smarter. They're teaching, have things like sandwich courses so that people can actually put into practice what they've learned, which is better, but it still doesn't give you this noetic experience. Noetic quality is limited to qualities of mind, and by working with the mind to make it more radiant or still, then you open it up to allow it to access these sorts of qualities of knowledge much more easily. So deep understanding from meditation would fall into this category. And the interesting thing about this sort of knowledge is that it is transformative knowledge. You feel somehow changed by knowing something new. So it's not like saying, oh yeah, now I know that anger is really bad. Yeah, I'm not going to be angry anymore. But somehow it takes away the anger from your repertoire by the fact you learned about anger on that sort of level. It's strange in this sense. So it helps you overcome your personal faults and weaknesses at their root. So it's not simply a glimpse of something or knowing about something in theory. It actually changes you as a person as a result of having accrued that knowledge. Quite powerful. Hence the stuff of mysticism. Third quality is transiency. So it comes and it goes. Mystical experiences last for a relatively short period of time. If you want to ask someone if they have this aspect in their experience, sometimes you ask them if they've had brief glimpses into the heart of things, or if they've had transient visions of the transcendental, or passing moments of divine revelation or deep insight. This whole sense of time is quite interesting. I'll give an example. This one is from the book by William James. It's actually from the experience of someone hiking in the Swiss Alps with a group of their friends. And obviously, as they were walking in nature, one of the boys had a mystical experience as he was walking along with his friends. He was basically struck down by it. So I was in perfect health, nothing wrong with him. We were on our 6th day of tramping and in good health. I felt neither hunger nor thirst, and my state of mind was equally healthy. All at once I experienced a feeling of being raised above myself. The throb of emotion was so violent that I could barely tell the boys to pass on and not wait for me. I then sat down on a stone, unable to stand any longer, and my eyes overflowed with tears. The state of ecstasy may have lasted 4 or 5 minutes, although it seemed at the time to last much longer. My comrades waited for me 10 minutes at the cross of Barin, but I took about 25 or 30 minutes to join them. So what seemed like 4 or 5 minutes was in fact half an hour. What's known as a peak experience sometimes, or but something which passes. As for the passivity factor, it's often said that mystical experiences happen to someone and they're beyond the range of human volition and control. If you ask someone about that, you might ask them if they feel overwhelmed by a sense of wonder, being in a state of mystery outside their body, or grasped by a power beyond your control. And here again, from quite a mundane sort of situation, someone waiting at the side of a cricket pitch for their turn. The thing happened one summer afternoon on the school cricket field. While I was sitting on the grass, waiting my turn to bat, I was thinking about nothing in particular, merely enjoying the pleasures of midsummer idleness. Suddenly, and without warning, something invisible seemed to be drawn across the sky, transforming the world about me into a kind of tent of concentrated and enhanced significance. What had been merely an outside became an inside. The objective was somehow transformed into a completely subjective fact, which was experienced as mine, but on a level where the word had no meaning, for I was no longer the familiar ego. So something which comes upon you, rather than something you've willed into existence. You might think, well, what's the point of doing meditation then if it's going to happen by itself? But as you can see in all these experiences, they've always been in a peaceful state of mind when it's happened to them. So it's like you have to set the bait a bit by being in a happy and undisturbed state of mind, first of all, for these sort of things to come to you. So it's passive, but only under certain conditions. As for oneness, we move on to the fifth aspect. Unity of opposites is often talked about in these mystical scriptures of various sorts. Things which normally couldn't be together, fire and water or whatever, they seem to somehow come together. Subject, object, they seem to become one and the same. Non-duality, sometimes it's called in Buddhism. So if you want to know if people have had this aspect of the experience, you'd ask them about whether they feel at one with the universe. So the normal sense of me here, the rest of the universe there, somehow it's been overcome. Sensing unity in all things, like not feeling a separation between yourself and the next person. And feeling at one with all living beings, a sense of compassion perhaps, where their suffering is your suffering, their happiness is your happiness. Normally we don't feel like that. We feel their suffering is their concern. Their happiness, well, maybe I should have some of that too. So oneness, an example of this, I surrendered to a warm, loving presence which so totally engulfed me that the me in it was no longer separate from the experience. Again, back to the philosopher again. Often in meditation it's the same sort of thing. We start out, me here observing the object there, but later as the meditation becomes more subtle, you feel that you actually are not only with the object, but you actually are the object. As if there's no separation. You are the object, you're there with it somehow. Moving on again to this aspect of time. Some people say that mystical experiences transcend time, almost as if time stands still during the moment that you're experiencing it. If you want to ask more questions about it, sometimes it seems like a merging of past, present and future in a single moment. Or losing a sense of time, place and person. Or being conscious only of timelessness and eternity. An example of this, much older I'm afraid, I don't know if any of you have heard of Meister Eckhart, from the 11th century. He was a mystic, a Christian mystic. An exalted power of the soul knows no yesterday or day before, no morrow or day after, for in eternity there is no yesterday or tomorrow. There is only a present now. The happenings of 1,000 years ago, 1,000 years to come, are there in the present, and the antipodes the same as here. So this is why people can lose track of time, like the boy on the alpine path. You seem to be absorbed into the moment, to the point where time passes by without you being intentionally being drawn to it. On a more workaday level, I'm sure many of you have experienced meditations which have gone well, somehow seeming to be only a fraction of the time which has actually elapsed. You might think, well, time flies when you're enjoying yourself, but it's somehow more than that. Sometimes you're quite surprised yourself that an hour's gone by so quickly, for example. And the last thing, true self or true ego. There's a feeling that one has encountered the true self, cosmic self, that is beyond life and death, difference and duality, ego and selfishness. Does it sound familiar from the meditation technique again? There being a sense of what we normally consider to be us, like a physical existence, like what you see when you look in the mirror, is really only a very superficial aspect of yourself. But to get beyond that, beyond what is merely appearances, even for yourself, is quite a difficult thing to do. But what seems to happen with mystical experiences is that you touch on some part of yourself which you recognize as being somehow much more significant than this superficial aspect of ourself. Of course, different religions have different interpretations of what exactly that might be. A great being, or even a sense of knowledge or grace. It's expressed in different ways. In our own meditation tradition, sometimes it's expressed in terms of purity of layers of ourself, dimensions of ourself, which exist in another level of purity or wisdom, but which we can have access to only when the mind is that same level of subtlety. How you'd find out about people touching on these sorts of experiences might be asking things like whether they feel as if they've been absorbed within the divine or a greater being, or losing their everyday self into a greater being, or feeling your everyday self absorbed in the depths of being. Sound familiar? Well, yeah, some of them may seem more important to you than others. For meditation, though, it's like we are... an example of true ego. In man there is another self, the true self, which is not affected by ordinary happenings, which gives him a sense of identity through numerous bodily and mental transformations. It does not change in the slow changes of the organism, in the flux of sensations, in the dissipation of ideas, or in the fading of memories. That's why it stays with you even when you've forgotten other aspects of your mundane life. This is from Happold. So, is meditation somehow leading in the same sort of direction as mystical experiences? I have heard some concerns from people that they've somehow become that they're not sure if they really wanted to be struck down by flashes of lights as they are off on their holidays somewhere or walking to work. Maybe they sounded rather worried by this, whether if they meditated more it might happen to them often. But from my understanding of a lot of these mystical experiences, they are not generally people who do meditate. They tend to be people who have almost backed into these experiences by mistake, but who have written it down, of course. Not too many of them have been those who have been cultivating a spiritual path, or sometimes even been within a spiritual tradition. And in that sense, it's almost as if they are like amateur mystics, because they've not expected to come across these sorts of experiences at all. As for people like Meister Eckhart, they were actually Christian monks, so they'd probably be a little bit more prepared for these sorts of experiences. But meditation, somehow, it has a lot in common with mystical experiences. But it's almost like you have set a framework within which these things can happen to you safely and in a way that you have it to some extent under control. Meditation gives access to mysticism in several important ways. Firstly, it does help you to look beyond your superficial self, beyond the self which you see in the mirror, even if it's simply being aware of your personality or your character, strengths and weaknesses, or on a more profound level, perhaps looking into inner astral bodies and the more subtle bodies that lie within. Secondly, it helps you to go beyond your thoughts, given that if you're thinking about noetic knowledge, then obviously they are out of the range of normal mundane thinking. So to go beyond that sort of thinking to something where you can touch on the noetic qualities, this is certainly where meditation helps to quieten down the mind and to make a space in which mystical experience can arise. Thirdly, if you are subject to illusions about the world, like basically the world is nothing more than material things, then meditation can sometimes loosen that hold of those sort of illusions over you. As most people do go around in a sort of dream world, even if they're not delusional, but I think most of us are subject to quite a lot of illusions, at least, if not delusions. As for religion and religious traditions of various sorts, most of us have our roots in one or another of those religions. But sometimes they are nothing more than rites and rituals, and the sense of meaning in those religions may not actually mean very much for us on a personal level. But given that all the religious traditions have a mystical aspect to them somewhere, whether it be the Sufi mysticism of Islam or the ascetic traditions of Hinduism or the mystical saints of Catholicism or Tibetans who go off into caves and meditate in Buddhism, it helps perhaps to introduce that sort of aspect of religion to you in a more personal way, to help you to see connections between your own, maybe first small footsteps on the path of meditation and working with the mind, and seeing the connections with these amazing experiences which people have actually had, which are written down in the scriptures or in the diaries of people who have later on gone on to be mystics. And even though mystical experience does come by itself, but setting the conditions by which that can happen, meditation does a lot to prepare one for that. Instead of relying on chance or summer afternoons or being in a state where you have to walk through mountains for several days in order to feel at one with nature. In fact, meditation is quite a good time saver for people who would like to, maybe don't have quite as long as that to prepare their state of mind, or to rely on the weather to put them in the sort of state where they do feel the mind is open to more deeper experiences. You might think mystical experiences are quite rare. No? The sort of thing you tend to have quite regularly. But from my own experience, it's interesting that I've been giving teenagers the opportunity to talk about their religious or spiritual experiences. And quite a lot, actually, more than half have had some sort of experience. Mostly I've been surveying Buddhists, of course, but a lot of them are just sort of hanging around temples. They might not consider themselves Buddhists, but quite a lot of quite surprising experiences which they've had at a young age, even for quite skeptical people. So it's not that rare at all. So there is some interesting things to look forward to if you meditate. But the idea of having a tradition and a discipline to your meditation is that those experiences somehow are things that you can harness rather than overwhelming you and turning you into a person who can no longer face normal life anymore and wants to become a hermit, for example. I think meditation somehow domesticates the mystical experiences in a way which make them give meaning to your life rather than taking over your life. So I'll probably leave it there for today, apart from mentioning just briefly some follow-up events which are scheduled for this particular group. 27th of September, again a Friday evening, is schedule for the next talk. I'll think about what it might be over the course of the month, unless there are any special requests, of course. And also the Tuesday evening here has recommenced for anyone who doesn't know about that, who would like a weekly contact with the group from 7 to 8:30 every Tuesday evening. The group meets here. Anyone who's free can come along and have a half an hour meditation and a bit of a talk as well. Probably biscuits as well, I would imagine. But yes, I turn up once a month, and the rest of the time it's the group on the Tuesday evening. So I don't know if anyone has any questions they'd like to ask about meditation, mysticism, or anything else for that matter. Anything else I look like I might be able to answer. Yes, go on. Interestingly enough, neither James nor Happold thought they were, but a lot of my teenagers thought they were. So when you mention a religious or a spiritual experience, a lot of them did seem to think that their dreams fitted into that category. And there were things like being visited by relatives who had passed on in some sort of lucid dream. And I'd say that was, they were changed by those dreams. So they woke up a different person when they went to sleep. Simply from the acknowledging that there's more to life than just, communicating with relatives on the telephone, for example. It changes you. You have a realization that there's more to life than meets the eye. So I would say that would be a religious or a spiritual experience. Well, part of some of the colleagues I have who do similar research, but not with Buddhists, but with Christian children, found that the age 13 to 15 is a time which often is a watershed for spiritual experience in general. And it's a time when there seems to be an openness to all sorts of experience. You can probably fill in the details for yourself, but also spiritual experience. And if young people have a positive experience during those years, often it stays with them for the rest of their life and affects them in a positive way. And 13 to 15-year-olds seems to be a key age, almost like a watershed. And after that, it tends to become a bit more sort of fossilized into place. Whatever you've had in your teenage years tends to stay with you for the rest of your life, either good or bad. So yes, the interesting thing about the research with the Christian children was that they compared the mystical experiences from Catholic and Protestant school children in Northern Ireland, and they found remarkable similarities. Yeah, even though they're supposed to be on different sides of the barriers.
Being aware of, I don't think I need it actually, thank you.
Yeah, I suspect that there are like mystical experiences almost gone wrong in some sort of sense, almost not an intentional comparison, but like a sort of bad trip if you are into drugs. But there are, for example, St. John of the Cross had one of the accounts which he wrote was called The Dark Night of the Soul, and that was sort of fairly, it'd probably be censored fairly heavily against in horror sort of terms. There seem to be two paths which optimistic people say lead eventually to some sort of enlightenment experience. One is a sort of light way to it, and the other is a dark way to it. I think most mainstream religious traditions encourage people to stay on a pathway which leads them through the light. But there may be some people who are rather more extraordinary who can go on the dark side and come out unscathed. But in the meantime, there can be quite a lot of quite terrifying things which happen to them in the meantime. So I think having a clear understanding of a spiritual pathway is quite vital, because you need to be able to trust where you're putting your feet, as it were, on the staircase. And if you are really sort of lost without some sort of guideline and clear understanding of the practice you're doing, then it can also be a double-edged sword. And that's why I think it's good to practice within a tradition. I think, to put people's minds at ease, this particular tradition with the meditation on light and stuff tends to encourage that anyway. It's very hard to do it wrongly. But there are forms of meditation which do have their weak spots, and where they recommend that you do practice only with your teacher present, that sort of thing, almost as if they're sort of hypnosis. I know it sounds a bit odd to me, but these things exist too. So if you are a critical meditator, then do look out for things which do leave some area for confusion, because really you want to be sure about what you're doing. Having that confidence is I would say, essential to a wholesome spiritual journey. Yeah. As for those sorts of things, I'll leave them to saints to deal with things. I think it's always important to have a context for your experiences. And you might think, well, how can I have a context if they're this sort of, lofty experiences, which people don't normally have? But if you have it within a tradition, then you can see the connections of how that leads. And I think that's very important, to have, people who you can compare your experiences to, and to have some sense of where you are on a pathway, and have a map, as it were, to give you some direction to your experiences. Otherwise, you are really untethered sometimes. Yeah. You'd say some people have things which may appear like mystical experiences. They may actually be mental illness. Yeah. But yeah, I guess you're probably the best judge of that for yourself.
I don't need that, thanks. Which are really quite extraordinary, but obviously quite dangerous too.
Yeah. So yes, it's again to have a critical edge to your appreciation of mystical experiences. It can sometimes be helpful too. hearing voices and stuff like that. It's not all like things that you put in a book by William James. Stunned silence. And sorry? Yes. Yes, being on a path you trust, I think this is a message to take away. Given that there are experiences available to those who have a refined mind, but it's having a context for it and a pathway. And that way I think mystical experiences bring meaning to life and not nasty surprises.
Where can you not hear me? Okay, sorry. Some of these experiences are, when you're going to sleep, so you're in a sort of semi-meditative state, and you're perfectly normal. You haven't taken anything, any substances, etc. But there seems to be this disconnect that happens between the mental and the physical body, and that's when you hear of people being aware of a presence. And that's why I'm asking that they're aware of a presence, but they can't move because they're completely immobilized physically, but the mental state is aware, and so they think that they must be under threat. They can't do anything about it, and they think that the presence must be something dark. Have you heard of this?
Yes, I have heard of this.
Yes.
So,
I didn't know whether that was related to this or whether this is just all about enlightenment and ecstasy.
No, it's all good, what I've been talking about, without flattering myself. But I think it's worth pointing out a very important difference between focusing internally and focusing externally. You may have heard me give talks on this before. If you focus externally, you can also get meditative states, but they will be states that you are not in control of. With meditation in this tradition, and most sorts of meditation within the context of Buddhism, one focuses internally, and you can also attain meditation, focus, one-pointedness of mind, but it's something which you could stop at any time you feel like. If you're somehow absorbed on a point out there, you're drawn into it in a way that you can't stop when you want to. And this can be quite dangerous. There's sorts of things like hypnosis are in the same category. If you fall asleep in a state of mind where you're not focused internally, you wake up in that state of not being in control of yourself, body and mind somehow being out of sync. And you wake up aware, but you're not actually fully within your own body. Because what tends to happen when you dream, if you're not a particularly centered person, is that body and mind go off in different places. Your dream body, as it were, goes off and has a journey while you're asleep. Quite tiring, really. It means you don't get too much rest for your mind while you're asleep. And if you happen to wake up when the mind is not fully back, because that body almost inhabits a realm of spirits anyway, because it is your spirit, then your body feels paralyzed, but you are aware as you wake up. And you're able to see other things which are also spirit world at the same time. This is not really meditation per se. It is a altered state of mind, but not one you're in control of. It's like a sort of interrupted dream, as it were. And the solution for this would be the 10 items of homework, which are: make sure your mind's at the center of your body before you go to sleep. Make sure the first thing you do when you wake up is center your mind. Because otherwise, sleep can be a time, especially for people whose mind is not particularly well established, centered anyway, can be quite a terrifying experience. Meditation actually, if it's proper meditation, should help them to avoid that sort of experience.
Yeah, so meditation helps you to center.
It should to be centered and to have that awareness even at the time you fall asleep, so that you don't end up sort of waking up when you're not ready for it. Yeah, it's quite a common experience, but that I wouldn't count as mysticism really. More like a person who's had a disconnect, fallen asleep when they're sort of half drunk or whatever, you know.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
Lots of people, thank you, apparently have these experiences. Why is it then, do you think, that there's so many, they get such a bad press? Because I'm aware, I suppose personally as well, I have to say, you know, I'm maybe judge people and think, oh, you sound a bit mad to me. They, you know, they do, don't they, get quite a bad press, as if there are so many people who just don't have a clue what it's all about. So...
I think what William James and Happold did quite well was to describe the aspects of experiences from people who were reasonably sane and which affected them in a positive way. In those days, I think there were not so many possibilities for mood-altering or personality-altering medication, where today we really do have, you know, less people in institutions, more people back out in society, but using this sort of medication. We're at a very odd place in society where we quite often meet up with people who are on such medication, or maybe have not been taking the proper dosage of it. Whereas in the old days, I think we wouldn't get to meet them at all. So I think, you know, they are with us in society more these days. But I think, I think the thing is to reflect on it for yourself personally, rather than taking these experiences to judge other people. I think that's more the message of the talk tonight. Not saying, oops, you know, this person's hearing voices, does this mean that they're a mystic, or does it mean they're a mad person? But for yourself, if you reflect on perhaps your own experiences, to see what has actually contributed to your own sense of meaning in life. I think that's a more interesting way of looking at these sorts of experiences from your own personal point of view.
I think if you have one of these experiences, you tend not to share it because you tend to realize that you can't explain it. And I think the people who do them don't really share them generally.
Yeah, it is sad. I've done some writing on for people in the psychiatric profession, because sometimes people are, although religious faith can be very helpful to people who are mentally ill for their recovery, very few patients will dare to mention any interest at all in religion, because they know what the psychiatrist will immediately jump to conclusion for. That, you know, here we go again, better up the dosage here, starting talking about religion now, must be wrong. Actually, it could be their refuge. If the psychiatrist knows the appropriate way to leverage that, to help them to regain their confidence or whatever. So it's a fine line. But one psychiatrist shared with me that psychiatrists are actually under a lot of pressure to act quickly for the patient's health. And if a person has psychotic symptoms or schizophrenic symptoms, usually you have to come down very hard on them quickly with quite a strong medication. And often that can shake them out of it. But if you don't have the right information at your disposal as a doctor, and you're not familiar with, a guy says he's a Zoroastrian, what does that actually mean? Well, just give them medication anyway. You might be missing out on something which is completely messing up that person's life for the next 10 years until they come off this medication. So having that awareness is very important for health professionals, so that they can make a diagnosis accurately. Otherwise, it can make some terrible mistakes. I know people have been on medication for 10 years for the wrong reasons, simply because they mentioned they'd seen a ghost. Yeah, it was all scary sometimes. It wasn't England, fortunately. So yes, it's a fine line. But the idea of mysticism, I think, is to refer it to yourself. And people go around bragging about their experiences like that. I think generally that's not the sort of general sign of a mystic. They write it down in diaries and bury it somewhere is not the normal way to go about it. Yeah.
Going towards something different. I mean, is this the goal, or goal is something else?
No, I think for meditation the goal is wisdom. But many people seem to have mystical experiences outside the context of meditation, almost by mistake, if you like, which makes them appear to be not religious experiences, but more an aspect of human nature. But what meditation seems to do, and what the advantage of meditation seems to be, is that it helps people to somehow incorporate those experiences into something which is helpful to them as a character-building process, rather than simply being something odd that happened to you in your life, or something perhaps possibly disturbing as well. To have funny experiences has never been the object of meditation, but the wisdom that comes from that is something which meditators find valuable. But it's how do you get the wisdom out of these experiences? Often that's the where you have an advantage if you already have some sort of spiritual practice of your own.
Thank you.
Wow, gone all quiet again. Anyway, I think I shall draw it to a close there, and you don't need to come out and confess your mystical experiences. But if you can think of a better subject for next time, do pass on your suggestions to Ray, and I can try to fit those in somewhere so that we don't get too dramatic in our subjects.